Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever loved someone so deeply that you gave pieces of yourself you didn't even realize were leaving? Have you ever held space for another's pain, forgave more than was fair, and still felt unseen? Tonight, we uncover a topic about super empaths and the narcissists who fail to honor their love, a story of boundless patience, quiet devotion, and the silent, irreversible consequences that follow. This is a journey through heartbreak, awakening, and self respect, a lesson in love, loss, and the courage to finally choose yourself before it's too late. The super empath's gift is not something that can be taught or forced. It is an instinctive way of being in the world. It is the rare ability to feel deeply without needing permission, to sense emotions that are never spoken, and to understand pain even when it is disguised as pride, anger, or silence. A super empath doesn't just listen to words, they listen to energy, tone, and what lives between moments. They notice shifts in mood, unspoken sadness, and hidden fears long before anyone else does. What makes this gift so powerful is their unwavering belief in human potential. Super empaths see who people could become, not just who they are in their broken moments. Where others walk away, they lean in. Where others judge, they try to heal. Their loyalty is not rooted in weakness, but in hope. The hope that love, patience, and understanding can awaken the best in someone. They give chances not because they are naive, but because their hearts are wired for compassion. However, this gift comes with a cost. Super empaths often place others' needs above their own, believing that love means endurance. They pour emotional energy into relationships, offering reassurance, forgiveness, and emotional safety, sometimes forgetting that they too need protection. Their kindness is steady, their support unconditional, and their presence grounding. They become a safe place in a chaotic world. Yet, what many fail to realize is that this depth is not endless. The super empath's gift is powerful, but it is also sacred. When it is taken for granted, dismissed, or exploited, it doesn't disappear, it retreats. And when that gift is finally withdrawn, it leaves behind a silence that reveals just how rare and irreplaceable it truly was. And this is where the contrast becomes painfully clear. Because while the super empath is giving from a place of depth and sincerity, the narcissist is operating from a blind spot they rarely recognize. They confuse control with strength. They mistake attention for love. And in doing so, they fail to see the gift standing right in front of them. To the narcissist, power feels like being needed more than being understood. They believe that if someone stays, tolerates, adjusts, and bends, it must mean they are winning. The empath's patience becomes proof of dominance. Their forgiveness becomes permission. Their silence becomes submission. What the narcissist never pauses to consider is that true strength doesn't come from holding power over someone. It comes from being safe enough that someone chooses you freely. Attention to them feels like validation. Being admired, prioritized, and emotionally chased feels like love. But love is not performance and it is not possession. Love is presence. Love is accountability. Love is knowing that another human being has a limit and honoring it before it is crossed. The narcissist's blind spot is that they are so focused on how they are seen that they fail to see who is seeing them. While the empath is building connection, the narcissist is managing perception. While one is nurturing trust, the other is guarding control. And slowly, invisibly, this imbalance grows. The empath feels unseen despite giving everything. The narcissist feels powerful, unaware that the very behavior they believe secures loyalty is quietly eroding it. They don't realize that the empath's love was never guaranteed, it was chosen daily. And when control replaces care and attention replaces respect, that choice begins to fade. Not in anger, not in drama, but in understanding. And that is the moment the blind spot becomes a turning point. One they never saw coming. And this is where the story quietly shifts because what the narcissist never hears is the sound of a heart reaching its final threshold. The breaking point of a super empath does not arrive with shouting or threats. It arrives in stillness, in observation, in a growing awareness that love should not require self abandonment to survive. For a long time, the empath keeps going. They explain themselves more clearly. They try softer tones, deeper patience, kinder understanding. They believe if they just love better, communicate better, endure longer, something will finally change. But each unmet need, each dismissed feeling, each moment of emotional invalidation becomes a small crack. Invisible at first, easy to ignore, until one day those cracks connect. The silent breaking point is not fueled by rage, it is born from exhaustion. It is the moment the empath realizes they are carrying the entire emotional weight alone, that they are fighting for connection while the other is fighting for control, that love has turned into labor and peace has become conditional. What makes this moment so profound is that the narcissist often feels nothing has changed. From the outside, the empath still shows up, still listens, still gives, but internally something sacred has shifted. The empath stops arguing, not because they agree, but because they no longer need validation from someone who refuses to see them. They stop chasing clarity because clarity has already arrived. This is the most dangerous moment for the narcissist, though they rarely recognize it. Because when the empath stops reacting, stops pleading, stops over-explaining, it is not indifference, it is preparation. Preparation to choose self-respect over sacrifice. The breaking point is silent because it is final. There is no dramatic collapse, only a calm decision rooted in self-awareness. And once that line is crossed, love doesn't beg to return. It releases, quietly, completely. And by the time the absence is felt, the choice has already been made. And once that silent decision is made, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. For the super empath, love was never passive. It was work. Emotional labor performed daily, often invisibly, often without acknowledgement. Love for them meant fixing what was broken, holding space for pain they did not cause, and carrying conversations that should have been shared. They became the bridge, the translator, the emotional anchor, believing that effort was proof of devotion. They adjusted their tone to avoid conflict. They swallowed hurt to preserve peace. They chose understanding over ego again and again, not because they were weak, but because they believed relationships were built, not abandoned. Love in their world was an action verb. It meant staying present even when it was uncomfortable and choosing empathy even when it was not reciprocated. But over time, love as labor becomes unsustainable when it flows in only one direction, when one heart is constant. Repairing while the other only consumes, exhaustion sets in. The empath begins to realize that love should not feel like a full-time job with no rest, no recognition, and no shared responsibility. That devotion should not require self-neglect as its entry fee. This realization doesn't make them bitter. It makes them honest. Honest about how much they have given. Honest about how little they have received in return. Honest about the fact that love is not meant to be proven through endurance alone. And this is where the shift deepens. The empath starts asking quiet questions they once avoided. Why am I the only one trying to fix this? Why does my pain need translation to be taken seriously? Why does loving you require me to lose myself? When love turns into labor without partnership, it stops being love. And the super empath, finally seeing this truth clearly, begins to lay down the weight they were never meant to carry alone. And as the empath slowly lays that weight down, another truth rises to the surface. One the narcissist has long misunderstood. What they believed was power was never strength at all. It was an illusion, carefully maintained, quietly dependent on someone else's endurance. The narcissist mistook dominance for security. Being obeyed felt safer than being understood. Having the upper hand felt more comfortable than being vulnerable. They believed that control kept people close, that emotional leverage guaranteed loyalty. And for a while, it worked, because the empath tolerated more than most ever would. But tolerance is not proof of power. It is proof of patience. True strength invites honesty. It creates space for disagreement without fear. It allows accountability without collapse. But the narcissist avoided this kind of strength because it required self-reflection. So instead, they leaned on authority, emotional withdrawal, manipulation, or superiority. Believing these tactics made them untouchable. What they never realized was that their sense of power existed only because someone else was absorbing the impact. The empath softened consequences, translated emotions, and buffered conflict. They made the relationship function despite imbalance. And as long as the empath kept compensating, the narcissist could continue believing they were in control. But control is fragile. It depends on fear, silence, and compliance. The moment the empath stops accommodating, the illusion cracks. The narcissist feels exposed, not because they lost power, but because they never truly had it to begin with. This is why the shift feels so destabilizing. When the empath withdraws emotional labor, the narcissist doesn't feel strong. They feel lost. The dominance that once felt secure now feels hollow. The silence that once punished now echoes back at them. Because real power was never about control. It was about mutual respect. And when that was absent, the structure could only stand as long as someone else held it up. Once the empath steps away, the illusion collapses under its own weight. And when that illusion collapses, something remarkable happens on the other side of it. In the quiet space where control once lived, the super empath awakens. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but clearly. This is the moment when self-respect rises louder than hope, and truth becomes impossible to ignore. The awakening is not fueled by anger toward the narcissist. It is fueled by compassion finally extended inward. The empath realizes that loving someone should never require shrinking, explaining their worth, or negotiating basic respect. They see, perhaps for the first time, how much of themselves they have been giving away in pieces, time, energy, identity, just to keep something alive that was never balanced. This clarity is powerful because it is calm. There is no need to convince, no urge to prove, no desire to fight for understanding anymore. The empath understands that staying would mean betraying themselves. And leaving is no longer an act of loss. It is an act of alignment. Choosing self-respect does not mean the empath stops caring. It means they stop sacrificing their well-being to be chosen. They begin to honor their boundaries, not as walls, but as declarations of self-worth. They stop chasing reciprocity from someone who was never prepared to offer it. To the narcissist, this moment is confusing. They feel the shift but cannot control it. The empath is no longer reactive, no longer over-explaining, no longer bending. The emotional access that once felt guaranteed is now closed, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. This awakening changes everything. Because once someone who loved deeply learns to love themselves with the same intensity, there is no return to self-abandonment. The empath steps forward with dignity, not bitterness, with clarity, not regret. And in choosing self-respect over sacrifice, they don't just leave a relationship. They leave a version of themselves that believed love had to hurt to be real. And it is only after that door closes that the narcissist begins to understand what was truly lost. Though even then, the understanding comes without the closure they crave, because this loss does not arrive with explanations or second chances. It arrives as a haunting absence. The super empath does not leave chaos behind. They leave silence. And in that silence, the narcissist is left alone with something unfamiliar, themselves. No one translating emotions, no one softening their edges, no one reflecting their value back to them when insecurity creeps in. What they lose is not just a person, but a mirror, one that once showed them depth, possibility, and humanity. This is what makes the loss so unsettling. There is no dramatic confrontation to replay, no final argument to win. The empath doesn't linger to justify their departure. They simply stop showing up. And without that presence, the narcissist feels an emptiness they cannot name. The attention they once chased feels shallow. New connections feel surface level. Admiration feels loud but hollow. They may tell themselves the empath was too sensitive, too demanding, too much. But in quiet moments, something gnaws at them. A sense that something irreplaceable slipped through their hands, not because it was taken, but because it was mishandled. The absence offers no reassurance. It doesn't explain. It doesn't return to prove anything. It just exists, steady and undeniable. And that is the consequence. There is no closure because closure requires reflection, accountability, and humility. The empath has already done that work. The narcissist has not. So the loss lingers. It echoes in moments of loneliness. It shows up when praise feels empty and control no longer satisfies. Because they didn't just lose someone who loved them, they lost the one person who saw them fully and stayed longer than anyone else ever would. And that kind of loss doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly, and it stays. And what makes these consequences so profound is that they do not arrive loudly. There is no dramatic downfall, no public reckoning, no moment where the world points and says, "Now you understand." Instead, the consequences slip in quietly, almost politely, and take up residence where noise once lived. The narcissist expects pain to announce itself. They expect anger, confrontation, desperation, or pursuit. What they receive instead is indifference wrapped in distance. The empath's silence is not punishment, it is completion. And that is what makes it so unsettling. There is nothing to argue with, noth. Ing to defend against, nothing to control. Regret begins to surface in subtle ways, in moments when achievements feel strangely empty, in conversations that never quite reach depth, in relationships that feel interchangeable, easily replaced yet never fulfilling. The narcissist may still be admired, still be desired, still be followed, but something is missing, and no amount of external validation seems to touch it. Isolation doesn't come from being alone, it comes from being unseen. And without the empath, there is no one willing to look beneath the surface, to sit with discomfort, to hold space for complexity. The narcissist is surrounded yet unsupported, heard yet not understood, powerful yet internally disconnected. These consequences don't shout because they don't need to. They persist. They show up in the quiet at night, in the pauses between distractions, in the realization that no one knows them the way that empath once did, and perhaps no one ever will, not unless they are willing to face themselves honestly. This is the cost of confusing control for connection, of mistaking admiration for intimacy, of believing dominance could replace emotional safety. The consequences don't destroy, they hollow, slowly, consistently, and by the time the narcissist recognizes what they are living with, there is no door to knock on. The silence is not an invitation, it is the result. And while that silence settles in on one side, something entirely different is happening on the other, because absence does not affect both people the same way. Where the narcissist circles the same patterns, the super empath moves forward. The empath does not heal by forgetting, they heal by understanding. They reflect, they grieve honestly, and they take responsibility for the ways they abandoned themselves. They learn where compassion became overextension, where loyalty crossed into self. Erasure. And instead of hardening, they refine. Their empathy becomes wiser. Their boundaries become stronger. Their love becomes intentional rather than unconditional. This is growth, quiet, grounded, and irreversible. The narcissist, however, often mistakes survival for progress. They replace instead of repair. They repeat instead of reflect. Without self-awareness, the same dynamics reappear in different faces, different names, different settings. The story changes, but the ending doesn't. And each cycle reinforces the belief that others are the problem, never the pattern. What makes this contrast so stark is that growth requires humility. It requires sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. The empath learns this through pain. The narcissist avoids it through distraction. One evolves, the other remains trapped in a loop that feels familiar but never fulfilling. Over time, the empath's life begins to expand. Their connections deepen. Their peace becomes non-negotiable. They attract relationships built on mutual respect rather than emotional imbalance. They stop proving their worth because they finally know it. Meanwhile, the narcissist may appear unchanged on the surface, confident, composed, admired, but internally there is stagnation. The same dissatisfaction, the same emptiness, the same question that never gets answered: why does nothing ever last? This is not punishment. It is divergence. Two paths splitting quietly after the same ending, one leading towards self-awareness and freedom, the other looping endlessly through avoidance. And growth, once chosen, does not look back. And this brings us to the ultimate lesson, the truth that the narcissist only realizes when it is far too late. Some people cannot be forced to stay, cannot be manipulated into forgiveness, cannot be made to love endlessly without reciprocity. The super empath is not just given. G-love, they are choosing it every single day. And when they finally choose themselves over someone who refuses to honor them, that choice is absolute. The narcissist may look back and feel regret, but regret is hollow without understanding. They may replay memories, search for ways to reclaim what was lost, but the empath is already gone, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. The space they leave behind cannot be filled with charm, control, or apology. It is sacred because it has been claimed by someone who finally recognizes their own value. This is the lesson the narcissist struggles to comprehend. The worth of what they had was never guaranteed. It existed because someone believed in their humanity, even when they could not see it themselves. They were given patience, compassion, and unconditional effort, rare gifts that cannot be recreated once withdrawn. And when the empath walks away, it is not out of spite or vengeance. It is out of recognition that some things are more precious than the suffering caused by staying. Some losses are permanent, not because the other person is unforgiving, but because some lessons cannot be unlearned and some boundaries cannot be crossed twice. The narcissist faces silence, emptiness, and reflection in isolation, while the empath moves forward, empowered, healed, and whole. And so, the story ends not with punishment, but with clarity. Cherish those who love deeply, honor those who see fully, and never take for granted the hearts that choose you every day. Because when a super empath finally steps away, the loss is complete, and no apology, no explanation, no attempt to control can ever bring back what was freely given. And that is a truth that echoes far longer than regret ever could. And now, as we stand at the edge of this story, let us pause and feel the weight of what it truly means. This is not just a tale of heartbreak or loss. It is a mirror held up to every relationship, every choice, every moment where love meets respect, patience meets pride, and devotion meets entitlement. The journey of a super empath teaches us that love is not measured by endurance alone, but by balance, by reciprocity, by the quiet acknowledgement of worth on both sides. Think about the people in your life who have given without expectation, who have held space for you when you couldn't hold it for yourself, who have loved you not because you earned it, but simply because it was who they were. Imagine what it means to take that presence for granted, to mistake patience for weakness, to confuse attention with affection. And now imagine the moment they decide enough is enough, the moment they choose themselves over a love that demanded more than it gave. That moment is not loud, but it is undeniable. It is a turning point that changes everything. And here is the power of the lesson. We all have a choice in how we love and how we are loved. We can honor the hearts that meet us fully, or we can ignore the depth standing before us at our own peril. The super empath rises not from revenge, but from clarity, self-respect, and wisdom. They remind us that true love nurtures, it does not diminish, it empowers, it does not trap, it builds, it does not hollow. So let this story stay with you. Let it challenge the way you seek connection, the way you show care, the way you value those who give wholeheartedly. Because when a heart that has loved completely decides to walk away, the consequences are silent, profound, and unforgettable. And that silence, it speaks louder than any words ever could.